Hello, today we're going to talk about the introduction in Northern Africa. Africa is the world's second largest continent. Its length is 5,000 miles, its width is 4,600 miles. It's in the tropical zone, which means it's right on the equator, so it means it's pretty hot there. It's actually where the Sahara Desert is. It is in the eastern hemisphere, but because it runs right along the equator, it's in the northern and southern hemisphere also. It's surrounded by mostly oceans. To the north, or and seas and stuff like that. To the north is the Strait of Gibraltar and the Mediterranean Sea. To the west is the Atlantic Ocean. And to the east is the Suez Canal, the Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean. And at the southern part, the Atlantic Ocean and the Indian Ocean combine, and that's what's down at the southern portion of Africa. So the Europeans' exploration and colonization of this area, the Portuguese were the first Europeans to explore Africa in the late 1400s. They were looking for a route around Africa to get to India. Then they started settling here. The most important trade to the Europeans that settled in North Africa was the slave trade. Right? So there's a bunch of tribes in Northern Africa, and the bigger tribes basically conquered the smaller tribes and sold off the people to the Europeans for weapons and other goods. The Europeans took those people, put them in the bottom of boats in tiny areas. A lot of them died on the trip. They sent them over to America and sold them at a high profit. It's called the something triangle. So they went from Africa, where they bought slaves, sold them in America, took that money back to, I think it was England, spent whatever money they needed. They went back down to Africa, got more slaves. It was this triangle that went on for a long time, and it finally became outlawed in the 1800s with the British leading the way on that. But slavery was actually the Europeans' biggest trade in Northern Africa. They also wanted ivory, gold, wood, and rubber that was available in this region. So what they did is instead of going to war for all of Africa, what the Europeans did is they didn't want war. So they had the Berlin Conference in 1884, and they split Africa into regions. There was absolutely no African representation. At this conference, they basically just said, we're going to split it up and there's nothing you can do about it. And they split it up and they didn't have any war. What this created, though, was tribalism. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But most of these colonies finally gained their independence from the Europeans in the 1960s. This was after World War I and after World War II. Europe was kind of devastated because of these wars and tired. So the African people started liberating these colonies they had set up from European rule, and it became back under African rule. So basically, they had their first elections in the 1990s, first free elections, because what happened was after the U.S. and the Soviets started the Cold War. So at this time, the U.S. and the Soviets actually never fought a war against each other. What they did is they supported other people, other little wars, and in this region of Northern Africa is these dictators would get in charge and they'd ask the U.S. for something or the Soviets for something, and if they said no, they'd just go to the other side. So if they asked the U.S. for, hey, can I have a car? The U.S. would say no. And then they go to Soviets, and Soviets would be like, yes, so that they could gain their support. So these dictators took over at this point. But once the Cold War ended in 91, these dictators couldn't stay in power because they couldn't ask the Soviets for the U.S. for anything because they didn't need anything from them anymore. So that's when they started holding their free elections and started having elected officials. So the problems facing the African nations was tribalism. It was one of the largest single problems in modern Africa. That is because the nations created by, and I did the nations because that's what it was in our thing. It had it in quotations. Created by the Europeans. They didn't like each other, so they didn't want to help each other in any way. The different religions in this area also kept them angry with each other, as religion does throughout history. Another issue is because they're in the tropic zone and it's so hot and a lot of it's desert, is they can barely grow enough food to survive. And when they do, a lot of it all depends on if there's going to be a drought or there's a war or something like that. They have a lot of disease and lack of good medicines. Because of this, AIDS has spread throughout there, and you have a lot of orphan kids because the parents get it and die. And they borrowed billions of dollars from other wealthier countries, and there would really be no way for them to ever pay it back. So the Northern African geography and history. So it has 8 countries along the coast and 4 inland nations. Most of it is made up of the Sahara Desert, which grows every year. In the Sahara Desert, there's little pockets of water where there's greenery. They're called oases. And at these oases, you have nomads that travel the desert. They're groups of people that just go around the desert and they use up the resources there. And once they use up the resources, they actually move. The most notable ones of the nomads were the Berber people. They were fierce warriors, and they had to be fierce warriors because they had to fight over the little bit of resources that were in the desert where they were traveling around. The Berbers were forced into Islam by the Muslim army that came through this area. And the Atlas Mountains go from the west to the east, and the Sahel is on the southern edge of the Sahara. And salt and gold was what was traded between North Africa and the Niger River Empire. So there's not much green in this region, especially because it's Sahara Desert. It says in there that eons ago it was a very rich place and always had rain and everything, but because of the tectonic plates and stuff moving around, it has become a drought area and a massive desert. All right, I hope this has helped. This has been Introduction in Northern Africa. Good luck.